So hello everyone, and on the phone, Dr. Liu is running just a little bit late, so he'll be here in probably 7 minutes at this point, but we're just going to go ahead and get started. I'm not going to pretend to do opening comments for Dr. Liu, but why don't we go ahead and do introductions. Philip Fine, Deputy Executive Officer, Southwest SCAQMD.
Zurich Petervasian Planning and Rules Manager, Southwest SCAQMD.
Romshan, the Southern California Association of Governments.
Carla Dela Cruz, Sierra Club.
Martin Hansberger with Holiday Rock.
Bill Lamar, Executive Director of the California Small Business Alliance.
Janet Whittick Speed, California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance.
Dan McGivney, SoCal Gas.
Bridget McCandless.
Kurt Coleman, Southern California Air Quality Alliance.
Art Montezuma International. Tyrone Turner, Dakota Communications.
Ann Scagliola, AQMD. Khadija Abdullah, AQMD.
Bill Wong with General Counsel's Office.
Okay, on the phone from EPA.
Hello, this is Amy Dinsberg.
Hi, Amy. And California Resources Board.
Yes, this is Brian Clerico, and I've got some other staff here in the room with me. This is Patrick Gaffney.
Andrew Martinez and Gerhard Osterlich.
Okay, thank you. And anyone at sea remotely? No? Okay. So the next item on the agenda is the minutes. Any comments on the minutes?
I do have.
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
I was late, but I was in attendance remotely.
Sorry about your name, by the way.
Yeah, it's all right. My parents were actually close to naming me Marco, so it's kind of funny seeing it. But small adjustment to the minutes.
Okay, did you send it to Aunt?
I will.
Anything else, Bill?
Yeah, on page 2, under CARB regulatory activities, my recollection from the notes that I took, that I asked Brian a question about the status of their CTR reg, and it said Brian provided CARB updates on proposed and recent regulatory activities. I don't know if Ann meant to have that included in there, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs down where it says Bill Lamar inquired about the emission reporting requirements, and that clearly addresses the CTR reg, but it's not. I would prefer that CTR or the entire name be spelled out so that we know what we're talking about. It's kind of like inside baseball here. So
okay, we'll do both. We'll say emissions reporting and
yeah.
CTR is criteria and toxics reporting.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Carla, just to be complete, did you want to mention what your small change was, just so everyone knows?
Yeah, just I don't believe I'm listed as members present in for the January 9th meeting, okay. So just wanted to change it.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions on the minutes? All right. So next on the agenda, Amy, you want to do a EPA update?
Yes, I just have a few brief things. Thank you, Phil. Hello to everyone. I just wanted to let everyone know for our fine particulate plan, this is the PM2.5 plan, the 2006 National Ambient Air Quality Standards Serious Area Plan. Our final rule approving most of that plan was published on February 12th, 2019. So that's the first action that we've been finalizing on the AQMP. And then just a few funding things. The Clean Diesel Grant announcement for the DERA funds for 2019. The request for application deadline has been extended to March 26, 2019. And we are expecting approximately $40 million in grant funds to support projects. These are aimed at reducing emission reductions from the existing fleet of older diesels. So we're glad to have that open. On the targeted airshed grant, that application process has closed, and we did receive and are currently reviewing a number of applications, including a few from the South Coast Air Quality Management District. And then I'll just stop there, Phil, but if folks have questions about any of the other national room rankings, I'll try to answer them. Otherwise, I'll leave it there.
Any questions for Amy? All right.
Does that, Moyer also part of the 40 mil? The 40 M? You mentioned some money for diesel.
That's the DERA Diesel Emission Reduction Act program. That's Moyer's a state program.
Okay, so what is that funded? Where is the 40 M?
I'll take the question. For the Diesel Emission Reduction Act, you're asking what the program is? Is that your question?
Well, where does that money go to? Does it go to administrative? Does it go down to the site level? Where is it?
Yes, it is, we accept applications from state and local air districts, any cities, any other nonprofits, and the funding is used to do everything from replacing engines in trucks, to purchasing new trucks, to any other sources of heavy-duty diesel. So we have a number of rail projects, off-road vehicles, et cetera.
Okay.
So it is used for actually doing retrofits or replacement.
I find kind of strange talking to a machine, but
I'm sorry.
That's okay. The question, I'm with the school district also as an elected. We've been benefiting from some of the monies from SCAQMD for the buses, but I have vehicles that go back to 92 that are used in my facilities because we've increased our lunch programs all year round, and we're serving like 10,000 more meals during the summer, and it requires the use of a lot of our vehicles to transport the meals, and this is in high poverty areas and such, but it's benefiting our test scores. So I'm looking to see what would it take to get some money to replace some of the vehicles that I have. And they're basically reefers. They're small, medium-sized trucks that are refrigeration units and such.
And they're diesel trucks?
I don't know. I don't probably not. I think they're probably gas, but I can check. But I also have some vehicles in the yard.
Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
I also have some vehicles in the yard I can check today with. Our guy should be back. He had an injury, so I'll check with our transportation people. But the 26th will be, that's what, another 2 weeks from now?
Right, yeah, it was originally scheduled to close in February, but we extended it because of the 5-week shutdown.
And who would we get the application from?
Yeah, that's great. So we have two options here. One is you could partner with the South Coast Air Quality Management District, and they could put forward an application on your behalf, and I'm sure Phil can provide a contact person.
Well, he's jumping up and down, ready to help me. Or you could have your facilities folks talk directly with my people, and they could better explain the program, and you could talk more about what your interests are to see if there's a match. So maybe the quickest thing is for you to, maybe Phil, if I may, have the contact person sent to Ann, and then Ann could connect us to, and I'm sorry, sir, I didn't get your name. My name is Art Montes. I'm a trustee in also Centralia School District. We service the cities of La Palma, Buena Park, and West Anaheim. If you're familiar with Knott's Berry Farm, that's where we're at. Over there.
Great. Well, Mr. Montes, I would love to have your folks talk with mine, and we can see if there may be some potential here.
Yeah, and I know there's other districts that would would look at it. But any help that you can assist us in, because 85% of my money goes to salaries, and that leaves very little money for the vehicles. As you can see, the vehicle's 90 since 92, that would place at 10, 20, 30, almost 30 some years old.
We've had some wonderful projects with school districts over the years, and we find great benefit because it really does help to reduce emissions for children in particular.
Yeah, thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, so Amy, if you send us your DERA contact, we'll get it onto Art.
Sounds good.
Any other questions for Amy? Federal side? All right, CARB activities, Brian, I know you guys are busy.
Yes, I thought, based on the last meeting's questions and interest expressed, I invited some CARB staff here to talk about, one is the reporting regulation. There were a lot of questions about that last time. And then also I have some staff from eCars here, because Dr. Liu had expressed some interest in infrastructure or green infrastructure type projects. So to get right to it, I thought I'd throw it to Patrick Gaffney here, working on the reporting regulation.
Hi folks, this is Patrick, and yeah, I'm the lead staff on the reporting regulation. We initiated the process about a year ago, and I'll give you maybe a 2 or 3 minute recap on where we are in the process, and then we can open it up for questions. As most of you are aware, we went to the board in December with a proposed regulation that included we call it the baseline applicability that's in AB 617, which was the legislation that kicked off this whole process, this red process. And the minimum requirements there were for facilities that were subject to mandatory reporting at 250 tons or more per year criteria pollutants, or were had elevated prioritization scores. That really didn't go far enough in terms of protecting community health, so we expanded the applicability criteria to include sources that are in selected communities as established by AB 617. So that's the proposal we brought to the board. When we brought it to the board, we received a lot of feedback from those that were testifying as well as comments, and the board directed us to go back to the regulation as part of the 15-day review process or change process, and to look at that as fourth applicability, the one that was focused on selected communities, and expand that to better satisfy the public health and air quality reporting objectives of 617 and 197 and other CAR programs. So that's what we've been doing since December, is revising the regulation. We've been working with the districts, with industry, with environmental groups, the whole realm of stakeholders to update the regulation to adjust that fourth applicability. We're about to complete a round of 5 workshops. We've been in Sacramento, Oakland, yesterday and the day before we're in San Diego and LA, and tomorrow we'll be in Fresno to talk about these 15-day revisions. The largest change to the reg we're proposing is expanding the scope, where reporting would be required not just within the selected communities, but statewide. And there would be thresholds for that. Right now, as is written in the regulation, and this regulation is available on our website now, the proposed 15-day changes, which are draft. We haven't put out a formal 15-day package yet. So currently in the proposed regulation, there's a 4-ton per year threshold for criteria pollutant. Except for CO, that's got a 100-ton per year threshold. So if you're below that, it would be brought in if you were anywhere in the state. And then for toxics, we've gone back to an approach that was used in the hotspots regulation in Appendix E, where there are multiple sectors identified, and each sector has either a specific threshold identified or it's a no threshold category. So for sources like metal platers, if they're doing metal plating, they don't have a threshold, they need to report under this program, regardless of the quantity of work that they're doing. But other sources like backup diesel generators, they would have thresholds such as 100 gallons per year for Tier 4, or if they're not Tier 4, it'd be 30 gallons. Paint shops, currently in the proposal, is a 30-gallon threshold. Gas stations, it's a 25,000-gallon threshold. For charbroiling, it's a 10 million standard cubic feet threshold. So basically, all these sectors have different thresholds. So that's what's out there now. We're doing these workshops in mid-April. The plan is to put out a formal 15-day package with these proposed changes. The idea is to have a regulation effective on the street January 1st, 2020. We're still working on the roll-in, basically when these provisions start coming in terms of timing. We definitely have the first year would be business as usual for districts. in that they would report whatever they're reporting to us now, and then in future years, the requirements become more stringent in terms of the data that's being reported. I think the last point on this is, as it's envisioned now, virtually all the reporting will still come through the district. So there will not be a double reporting mechanism. It will come to the district and then it will be provided to ARB, pretty much as it is now, but the scope, of course, is expanded and the types of data is expanded also. So that's what I've got. Any questions?
That was Patrick on the CTO,
On the emissions inventory?
on the reporting line.
Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Patrick. This is Bill Lamar with the Small Business Alliance. And thank you very much for your outreach. I was at your workshop yesterday and have been a regular participant last year and this year because this fourth criterion that you have really hits at my constituents. You might tell the if you can our group what the comment period is on this current go around. It's 15 day. I think it's the end of this month. We intend to submit comments citing our concerns as well as our constructive recommendations. So.
Yeah, thank you, Bill, and also for clarifying that. Right after the workshops, we're asking for informal comments, so we can fine tune the proposal. Then after that, we release the formal 15-day, and that starts the regulatory process, and then we accept formal 15-day comments. And I am saying 15 days, most likely the comment period will be extended beyond 15 days because of the complexity of the changes. We just use that as shorthand. And then we would, of course, appreciate your formal comments then. But if you can get comments in now, we can fine-tune the requirements before they go formal.
Well, Patrick, David told us yesterday the deadline for comments was March 29th.
Those are for the informal comments. And so those are not as part of our regulatory process. These workshops we're doing, they're not required as part of the regulatory process, but we want to do that as part of the outreach to include as many people as possible in being made aware of these changes.
But they still will be considered though, right?
Absolutely.
Right, sure.
Absolutely. The difference, there's these informal comments, we do not have to respond to them formally in the rulemaking, but after we put out this 15-day package in April, every comment we receive at that point in our final documents, we need to respond to every single comment about how we addressed that comment or why we did not address it. We do not need to do that on these workshop comments, but we will absolutely be considering all of them.
Good, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? I had a quick question just because I saw EPA's announcement yesterday that they had issued citations to a whole lot of folks about illegal importation of non-compliant engines and vehicles. And I was just wondering whether our inventories capture that, whatever illegally imported engines and vehicles may be actually out there.
That's another I appreciate that clarification. This regulation will only focus on permitted sources, except in very limited cases, unless the districts are already inventorying unpermitted sources. But right now, it's only permitted sources, so those would not, the sources you're mentioning would not be included in this.
That strikes me as a little odd because I think the intent of 617 and the language of 617 wanted a comprehensive inventory.
I totally get your point. It's like we can't inventory that we don't know where it is or where it exists and where it's being operated. So we're viewing this as the first cut. You know, that we have received quite a lot of input from environmental groups saying they want to go beyond permitted sources. You know, they want to go to any source, like you're saying. Just just don't think we can bite off that much of the apple right now.
There is a parallel effort at CARB and at AQMD that for the AB 617 communities to develop the modeling tools necessary, inventory tools to get a full picture of what's happening in those communities. So it's not just about, this is one tool on the stationary source side, there's other tools on the mobile source side.
Yeah, I think that's the idea when 617 was passed and signed was that there wasn't confidence in the accuracy of the inventories. I'm not saying South Coast inventory, which is everybody else. Certainly issues have come up and things like startup shutdown, malfunction, emissions, but also non-compliance and things like that. Bill, you had another question?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up. Chair Liu had mentioned, I guess, penalties raised for engines that were, I guess, counterfeit or imported illegally.
Yeah, they weren't permitted.
Yeah,
They weren't certified.
and your response, Patrick, about your only consideration being permitted sources. There's a difference here at South Coast. We have some non-permitted sources in Rule 219 and 222.
It's expanded that.
Yeah, and it's going with 1147. It's going to be expanded even more. Are those going to be exempt? I don't know if you're familiar with the District's 2 rules that I referred to, but maybe Philip can shed.
The only thing I know is the reg is focused on permitted sources or other sources that are currently inventoried by the district. So inventorying those 219 or 222 sources, then those would be subject to the reporting. The twist is only permitted sources are used for determining applicability. So those sources that need to trigger applicability be subject to reporting.
So at South
But I also did want to circle around in terms of the unregistered sources. I think someone already kind of pointed out this. For the selected communities, those are going to be gone through with a fine-tooth comb. I mean, every source is going to be, the attempt is going to be made to identify every source in those selected communities. But this reg is a statewide regulation, and so we can't apply that same level of detail throughout the entire state.
So there's kind of 2 aspects to that. So one is at South Coast through 219 and 222, we have a set of sources that don't require the full permit but are registered.
Right.
It doesn't sound like as of now that they're going to be required to report to the statewide system.
Year 1.
And there's
we don't know.
a difference between between reporting and inventory. When they show up in the inventory, they might not be required to report, but if we can account for their emissions by including them in the inventory, that would relieve the bureaucratic burden of having to report and keep the inventory accurate.
It's not like
closer.
It's not like we don't estimate emissions now for AQMP purposes from all sources, whether they're permitted, whether they're registered, whether they don't require a permit, whether they're mobile sources. The question is, this system that CARB and this rule that CARB is building, how much of that goes into that system, and then how much is actually required on the facility to report, or will CARB accept some of the estimation tools that the districts already use on some of those other types of sources. So I don't think there's been a decision made on the 219 exempt or the registered sources yet. You know, I think there is some value to having them in the system for a lot of different reasons, but I think it's just going to depend on how easy it is to get that data and whether our estimation tools we think are accurate.
So then, I guess just to be clear, if those facilities with 219 or 222 equipment, they're not going to be required to start
filling out reports.
Not as of now, per the CARB reg this year. That's true.
Not in year 1, but
yeah,
maybe in the future.
If they want, I don't know whether. I mean, it could always change in the future. But then there's the district reporting rules too. So if the district can decide that we want more data and there is some reporting aspect to it, that we want that data in our system.
But wasn't it painful enough just to ask them to have to register?
Well, if they're going from a permit to registration, it's not painful at all.
Okay.
It's going the other way.
Well,
and I think if my memory serves me correctly from 24 hours ago, I think the CARB staff said that they were going to accept the districts or the air districts estimates for gasoline stations.
Right, based off fuel, right?
Based off
Yeah.
fuel.
Actually, our Rule 461 actually requires gas stations to report their throughput right now.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of organizing that data in a way and using it
So that
in a way that we can satisfy what CARB needs. There's a lot of sources like that we think there's some very easy, whether it's us doing an estimation or just for asking the facilities for one or two pieces of data and putting it into some calculations we can do. I think there's ways to do it where it's not going to be very burdensome. There are going to be some sources that may not be reporting now, and for toxics reasons are going to have to do a little bit more than they do now. One of the bigger issues on the toxic side is we're talking about metal working facilities, like the emissions estimations aren't very good. We don't capture fugitives very well, right? So how are we even going to do those estimates? There's a lot of work that needs to be done to even make those emissions data more accurate than it is today, because we know we're missing a lot. So those are the things that are going to take some time to develop.
Yeah, this is Patrick. I appreciate the discussion about the reporting too, because we do have provisions in the reg to allow for what we're calling a rebate reporting for the gas stations and the backup generators, where the districts could provide that information based on data they collect rather than having to go to every single facility and have them report to the district or to the state.
Well, thank you for that. Were there any other questions on the ARB update at all? Anything?
I had another topic.
You have another topic you want to cover?
Yes, this is Brian Sarko. Yeah, so I also, thank you, Patrick, that was really good. I also invited, based on Dr. Liu's expressed interest in, I'll call it green infrastructure or transportation type projects, I invited staff from our e-cars division here to discuss, I think, areas of interest that would be of interest to South Coast. So this, I've got Gerhard Hatchlick.
That's right. This is Gerhard Hatchlick. I'm the manager of the Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure section within e-cars, and I'll just we focused on hydrogen infrastructure and tracking battery electric vehicle infrastructure or plug-in vehicle infrastructure. So I'll just give you our primary mission is to do supplemental work or supplemental activity work for the zero emission vehicle regulation. So we're not as our core is not as much of a regulatory section. I'll just give you a quick overview about some projects, and we work with the California Energy Commission on the Division of Measurement Standards in Food and Ag and a lot of these activities. But just to give you an idea, there are currently 64 hydrogen stations funded in the state, and 33 of those are within the South Coast SCAQMD, and then 21 of those 33 are open. And dispensing fuel right now, and this is for light duty side. And then there are, right currently, as our value as of last October, there are over 3,000 fuel cell vehicles in operation in the South Coast and 5,000 statewide. And our projections based on surveys, we expect to have by 2024 close to 23,000 fuel cells in operation in the South Coast. And then on the sort of heavy duty side, there is the project portal, and that's a project with the Port of Long Beach and Shell and Toyota, where they have a 1,000 kilogram production trigeneration facility. And trigeneration would be they are using a stationary fuel cell to generate electricity, hydrogen, and heat, and they're supplying what will be 10 prototype long-haul trucks that will be used in the future. Toyota will use those to distribute them or ride to dealers and other activities. But there are also fuel cell yard tractors, forklifts, and looking to electrify from the fuel cell perspective the port. There are a couple other renewable hydrogen production facility in the greater South Coast area. There's a 2,000 kilogram a day, 100% renewable production facility in the Moreno Valley. And it's projected to add an additional 3,000 kilograms. So we're looking at, a green production of hydrogen, where the traditional method is steam methane reformation, and even that method, on a well-to-wheel basis, is much cleaner than gasoline or diesel. We're looking to also take that to the next step of using more renewables, reducing carbon emissions, and depending on how it's produced, taking criteria for those emissions down. And we have there are also two fuel cell forklift facilities in operation in the greater South Coast area. One is with Kroger Foods and one is with Cisco in Riverside. The Kroger one is in Compton, and there are 5 statewide. And so that allows, they're mainly used in indoor application and replacing battery electric fuel cells. But with the fuel cells, you get consistent energy and use throughout its operation period. Batteries tend to degrade until they need to be recharged. With the fuel cell, they can operate at the same efficiency at the end of the shift or the same power or performance at the end of the shift as they do at the start of the shift. And then on the regulatory side, we are in the very early phases of investigating if there's a need for states to develop a station verification effort, and that would be to confirm the proper operation of a hydrogen dispensing station that would make sure that hydrogen stations dispense fast, safely, and consistently. And we're investigating, since hydrogen, in a sense, is a brand new fuel, then we need to take hydrogen to the same level of reliability and performance as a gasoline station, which was developed over 110 years, and we're trying to do this in a much shorter time. So it's sort of like a really high-level summary. Do you have any questions? I wasn't sure, what kind of information you're looking for, so I didn't want to distract too much from what you're asking or looking for.
Yeah, we have one question here. Art?
Well, I got several questions.
I'm sorry. We have several questions here.
Yeah, one of the interesting things over the years that I've observed, my name is Art Montes with AM International. Also, I'm with the school board and work with civil rights organizations. We're going to be looking at, with our organization, and launching some programs in the communities for social justice issues, more energy efficient vehicles and such. But one of the interesting things is that there's never been, I've seen, and maybe I'm wrong, a comprehensive program that overlaps and looks at, if we're going to go into hydrogen and electrical and such, you look at the minority communities and communities of color, there tend to be a lot of rental units. And even when the rental units are built out, the vehicles tend to be older that the individuals use, and then you don't have the ability to plug in like you would if you own a home and such. And so it makes it a lot more difficult. So it'd be interesting to see where you guys are locating the need for these stations if you're going hydro. And then also if you're looking at it comprehensively, because those are the communities that are facing the greatest challenge from the health risk. And when we look at the air quality in those communities, it'd be interesting to see if we're addressing a remedy, the type of remedies either from the federal and state levels to those communities, and providing those remedies and resources to rectify and mitigate those issues from the air quality. And it's because a lot of, and I'll be frank with you, it's because it hasn't been addressed a lot by our community, and it hasn't been addressed, frankly, by a lot of the environmental communities, simply because of the makeup of their boards and such. But we want to look at that, and I would be interested to see if you could provide us with data on that. And then you mentioned the ports, but in the Orange County, we have a huge distribution centers located around Fullerton, in the Fullerton area, where we have Albertsons, Kroger, all the big distributors, and it'd be interesting to see how you're working with them. And then you've had a huge emergence in the grocery industry in the Latino communities and the Asian communities. So it'd be interesting to see what type of outreach you've done in regards to those facilities and educating and changing the culture there. Do you have any background in that?
So this is Andrew Martinez. I'll take your questions one at a time. The first one, in terms of disadvantaged communities and communities where there are large numbers of rentals and multi-unit dwellings, that's actually part of the core justification for why the state is looking at supporting both zero-emission vehicle fuels. Or, you know, it's very difficult to make the argument that if we really need to transform our entire fleet over to, of all vehicles, over to zero-emission vehicles by, you know, say 2040, 2050 timeframe, that's all going to be achievable with a single fueling platform or a single drivetrain platform. There are certain aspects of BEV that work in a lot of cases, but there are certain aspects of fuel cells that work in a lot of cases, and that's actually one of those core kind of cases that is actually a strength of the fuel cell for multi-unit dwellings, where you're probably not going to be able to get, you know, one charger for every single vehicle at that dwelling. Having centralized fueling options, which is what the hydrogen model is, it follows the gasoline model, it's a good option, right? It provides fueling opportunities for people who may not have charging opportunities at home, right? And it can be done sited near home, near work, along their commutes. There's all kinds of different strategies that are out there that the state has been looking at. To answer your question in terms of how these stations are sited, the Energy Commission actually manages funds for hydrogen fueling stations, but they do take recommendations from us. Through Assembly Bill 8, there's a whole process of analysis and reporting that's required cooperatively between CARB and the Energy Commission. We developed a tool back in 2015 that we also updated in 2017. It's the California Hydrogen Infrastructure Tool, DHIT. It is freely available. It does essentially try to analyze where the first adopter market will be and look at where the funded stations are and planned stations are and try to find the gap for where we need more fueling infrastructure. It does that both on a market evaluation in terms of where fuel cells might be garage safe, but also where they might be driving. And we've since been doing analysis for related DHCs, and I believe our latest analysis showed about 1/3 of all populations within DHC actually have convenient access to a hydrogen fueling station. In terms of the vehicles, then there's the CVRP program, which does provide additional funds for any ZEV to those who have who meet a low-income requirement. So I know it's still, you know, there's always a question on the analysis of how far that goes, but there is that effort within CVRP. I'd also mention that CARB and in addition to other state agencies, through our collaboration and our membership with the California Fuel Cell Partnership, this past year the partnership published a vision for 2030. It's the California Fuel Cell Revolution, and we utilized our tool to try to help visualize and understand what would it look like getting a network of 1,000 stations that can enable the deployment of 1 million fuel cell vehicles as early as 2030. And in that analysis, we found that, you know, we can create a network that proportionally replicates the existing gasoline station network. It provides the same amount of access. It's not the same capacity, but the same amount of access in terms of how convenient it is to where people live and where people drive. And that station network that was adopted in that vision, that can provide convenient access to essentially 100% of all disadvantaged community populations throughout the state. So there is vision, there's work towards it, making sure that we're not leaving behind any communities and doing that. To your question in terms of on-the-ground outreach, I think that is definitely a valid question. Our process so far through AB8 has always been a public open process, so the Energy Commission holds workshops when they're developing draft concepts for a solicitation. It's a public document. They accept comments through a comment period and, quite honestly, beyond the comment period as well. They want to make sure they get these things right. So we always encourage, and right now, actually, there is a current draft solicitation. There was a workshop, I believe, last month. Technically, the comment period is closed, but I know that they would still accept comments. If you you are looking to provide comments, the solicitation number is 18-HYD-04. And so if you Google that pretty quickly, you can find where you would submit comments. So that process is going forward, and that this will actually be a potentially momentous solicitation because ABA provides $20 million per year, and in the past, the solicitations have been done on an annual basis. But this solicitation is saying we're going to essentially count on getting those $20 million every year and for the remaining years of the program and select station developers based on giving them the flexibility to try to plan for that larger amount and plan a multi-year program. We've seen that that's a very important part to getting to scale and getting more stations out there quickly. But in addition, I think your comments in terms of getting to the community, particular communities, that's probably something that's more directly related to our 617 staff. I think we may be able to circle back with them. And then in terms of distribution centers, so the projects that Gerhard mentioned that are focused on the ports, those have been funded two ways. One part of it has been funded through the Energy Commission Alternative Renewable Fuel Vehicle and Technology Program, but also through our own CARB GGRF funds. And so those kind of get directed by, through CARB staff recommendations and policy recommendations, but also legislative direction. So the particulars of how those funds are used and where they're spent in some regard, those are programmatic decisions, but I don't think it necessarily means that distribution centers inland should be ruled out or are intended to be ruled out. So I would personally suggest that when the next round of funds for GTRS comes up, if there's any opportunity to provide that feedback, I think that would be a valuable opportunity.
Thank you for your comments, but one of the questions that I wanted to get an answer was, I'd like to see the actuals. What have you apparently you've been working at it since 2015, so that looks like 4 years. So you should have had at least some best practices and some actuals in the field as to what is being done for those communities. And that's what I would like to see is actually what actions that you've taken or what practices that you've done in those communities, and what have you actually done there in citing stations and addressing it, and what have you learned from that? So if you could provide that back to us at some later at a later meeting or to Dr. Liu, I would appreciate that as we start to formulate best practices and legislation.
The list of stations is on the California Fuel Cell Partnership website. They have a very good map of all the stations and list of all the stations. So you can get that just by going to the website. You can learn a lot by going to the California Fuel Cell Partnership website.
Okay, thank you.
I think that this came up in the context of conversations about concerns that the infrastructure, both for electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles, may be the biggest holdup of getting the technology commercialized and in place to the extent that we need it to reach our attainment goals and to protect public health. It seems like these, especially in the heavy duty sector, the car manufacturers, the truck manufacturers, the off-road equipment manufacturers can kind of build whatever they have to if they have a market. The infrastructure is kind of a thing that is complicated. I know the original goal was 100 light-duty fuel cell stations, right? Is that still the plan?
Yeah, that's the ABA. Well, the ABA signpost, I would say. The ABA requires at least 100, but that ABA runs through January 1, 2024. So we are more than 2/3 of the way in terms of funded stations, a little bit over 1/3 of the way of them open. As Gerhard mentioned, there's still 25 that are under construction now. Most plan to be open this year, if not early next year.
Yeah, and I'm just concerned. I know if we are to get to the place where we actually have heavy duty trucks using hydrogen on a regular basis, we're going to have a whole lot more of hydrogen available to do that, and they're not gonna be able to fill up at these stations, they're gonna have to have their own dedicated stations. And
Yeah, that's largely the case today. I know that the Toyota demonstration truck actually does use light duty fueling. They essentially fuel a whole lot of tanks at once or multiple times on their truck. But there's a separate protocol. There's a separate nozzle. The intent is going forward that heavy duty trucks will have their own fueling facilities, but that doesn't mean they can't be co-located with light duty fueling. Similar to how you have, truck stops and rest stops today, you have gasoline and diesel combined at one station. But to your point, that is actually a very valid point. It's something that the state has been dealing with, especially in terms of just the production capacity, and especially if we want renewable production capacity within the state. So the Energy Commission actually funded that, or partially funded the facility that Gerhard mentioned earlier in Moreno Valley. That was a solicitation that they put together in 2017 to be able to fund 100% renewable hydrogen production facilities with at least a 1 ton per day production capacity. So they announced that one. They actually later went back and said they had funds to fund a second facility, which is in the San Joaquin Valley, that actually does 1 ton per day. So it's a very valid comment. The interesting thing is with hydrogen, what we're looking at is there's the question of how do we go from today, where we're clearly past the demonstration pilot phase, we're in an early market launch phase, but we need to get to a large-scale deployment phase, and that's the interesting question right now, is how to make that turn and that shift. But if that turn and that shift can be achieved, that means that costs come down for all of these technologies. So with a larger light-duty vehicle deployment, you get economies of scale on the fuel cells, so that the vehicles themselves become cheaper, and we've actually seen that translate to heavy-duty vehicles because of the experience of Toyota and some of the bus manufacturers as well. But then on the other hand, the hydrogen right now itself is also very expensive, and for light-duty vehicles, the auto manufacturers are covering that cost for the first 3 years. And so it's about 2.5 times more as expensive as gasoline, rough estimate. So obviously it needs to come down if everybody in the state is going to be able to utilize it. But then these heavy-duty vehicles, they use so much more hydrogen. So as more of those vehicles come online, you get the economies of scale on the fuel side, and that would be able to translate to the light-duty vehicles as well. So there's some interesting possibilities for synergies. There's interesting possibilities to make this happen, and the fact that it essentially kind of gets quote-unquote easier with greater scale. It's just how do we make that transition and ensure that scale can happen? And then it's all those questions. Yeah.
Actually, the level of participation from industry is definitely increasing. Certainly when this program started with, I guess, AB 118, I'll say in 2008, this was very heavily government funding, incentivized. But there's a transition, and an example I can give you that Air Liquide announced that they are building a liquid hydrogen facility. I think it has a 20 ton per day, 30 ton per day capacity that will open within like the next 3 years. And so that's a sign right there, that industry is recognizing that there's a demand for hydrogen, and we're still a long ways of replacing all of our gasoline fleet, but we're definitely incrementing our way towards that.
with the reliability of the light-duty stations, is it as much fuel as it is compressors going down and other problems?
I think today the biggest challenge would be assurance of a steady, predictable supply. The stations themselves are seem to be operating reliable, and one of the things we've seen is that the most recent stations that are being built have 2 fueling positions with 2 completely independent fueling positions. So in a sense, we're replicating the gasoline model, right? If you go to a station that has 10 nozzles and one of them is broken, you have to maybe wait in line but pull to the next one. And now with hydrogen stations, we're starting to see that they will have at least 2 fueling positions. So if one goes down, there will be another one available.
And in addition, there's a move now within the industry away from, in the past, most of the stations were gaseous delivery and gaseous storage, and that requires a lot of compression on site. And compressors, as you noted, some can be finicky. I will say that the industry has figured out a lot of things through the last 4 or 5 years of experience at California's hydrogen stations. But they're moving now to liquid. And liquid storage, you can have a pump, and that's much, A, lower energy cost at the station, B, much more reliable than the compressor, and has much lower maintenance costs associated with it, much longer mean time between failures from everything we're hearing. So that reliability is expected to, at least at the station side, be only increasing or getting as good as it can. As Gerhard mentioned, it's been an issue mostly of reliable supply. And that's kind of where we're coming to this question of where are we going to get a lot of production, especially if we want it to be renewable production.
Okay. I know you're not Bill Quinn, Janet.
I know.
You have the card.
I don't get in my own nameplate. Hi, this is Janet Wittick from SEED. Just a really quick question in terms of infrastructure cost. Recently on the Advanced Clean Trucks workshop, there was a number of examples provided comparing electric with diesel with fuel cell, hydrogen fuel cell, and I was surprised to see the very high cost projected out to 2030 for the fuel cell vehicles. Were those estimates based kind of on very conservative notions of commercialization, or do you see if we get a big win and we get much higher penetration rates that those costs are going to come down quite a bit?
Yeah, we didn't actually, I can't say I'll have to look for those, but this was on the vehicle cost or the fuel cost?
This was on total cost of ownership, so I was looking at,
Total cost of ownership.
yeah.
We do expect the cost to decrease with scale, and an example I'll just say for hydrogen, when Shell entered back into this field, they announced, it was in some of the public statement, they said simply through scale, and their scale was, I think they referenced 15 stations a year worldwide, they could reduce the capital cost of a station by 50%. If they get 100 of these, like 5 years of 15 stations a year, they could just, without any new invention, without any change in process, they could reduce the cost of a station by 50%. So that's a positive sign. That just means scaling up will give you reduction without, having to have a scientific breakthrough. And I haven't heard a quote like that for the vehicle, but I would think this scale applies everywhere. When you're building 100 vehicles a year or even 1,000 vehicles a year, your scale is not the same as 10,000 or 100,000. Because it impacts the whole supply stream, because the fuel cell manufacturers aren't making their own membranes. The membranes are supplied by other vendors, and once those other vendors see, a clearer projection that this is a growing area, they're going to invest in being more cost effective.
And the caveat we should mention is that the clean truck, right, that's a different group from ours, and so we were not involved with that, but we could probably try and find the correct staff to get the answer specifically to your question of what were the assumptions behind those numbers.
Yeah, you may want to try to build in some communications around uncertainty, because those numbers are pretty dramatic, and I would hate to see that projections where there's a high degree of uncertainty could actually foul efforts because they don't look viable compared to other options. So it's something to look
I
into.
do know that
It was
I do know that part of the issue is because of the scale, right? And so when we're looking at long term, and you're thinking about doing more than simply like a demo of a few buses or a few trucks, and you're trying to think about converting a company's entire fleet, or at some location entire fleet, things start to look different than on either side of that coin. So we can probably try and reach back to some of our colleagues here.
That would be helpful if you could get that information. I think also that we want to make sure that to the extent that people are changing over entire fleets and that Shell is opening up stations throughout the world, that all of them kind of come to South Coast first. We have the need. I have Art and then Bill Lamar.
Yes, one of the things I've been discussing with Dr. Liu and others is that I represent a civil rights organization, and I'm working with several other ones, and we're gonna be pushing heavy initiatives across the state and nation on going green because of the effect on our communities, and also because of the vehicles as they come off the secondary, as they come onto the secondary market, it'll help reduce the cost of the energy in our communities. But I'm concerned, like one of the other members here, was the hydrogen and the cost and such. So we need to get some hard cost, because when I've asked other individuals, nobody seems to have a handle on that. And then also the ability to form co-ops, because there's now the political will on our part to move forward from our community, and we can count the votes, I think, in the assembly and the legislatures to move it through. It's the question, is it economically feasible, and is it economically smart and politically smart to move on it? Because our first initiation would be to clean up our public institutions, those vehicles that get exceptions on the license, to have them clean out their barn first. And any leasees, anybody that's getting any allotments from any government facilities and such, and then move with our particular caucuses, the legislatures and at the legislative branches, to change at least the political and legal aspects of it, to not wait till 2030 or 2040, but to move this within the next 3 years, especially if they're leased out. But we need to get some hard facts, some actual costs. I can't go on visions and concepts. I need, if I'm gonna go to the table, I need some hard dollar amounts to be able to put forth, because it's an economic question. And that's what it's gonna come down to, the budgets and maintenance and sustainability. So if you can get those figures to us, the better it is for us to move this agenda forward. Thank you.
Okay. Bill Lamar?
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, this is Bill Lamar. One of my member trade associations boasts a membership of 2,700 gasoline service stations. With the ramping up of electric vehicles, charging stations, and now hydrogen, I think we started with the hydrogen highway some years ago, I have yet to see a plan that anyone can show a small business owner why they should go to the burden, expense, and risk of making changes in their current properties to accommodate these other fuels. Does one exist in terms of what it will take, what sort of a footprint that a small business service station would have to have?
Well, a lot of the existing ones are at service stations, the ones that have them built.
Yeah.
So there's got to be an emerging model, you would think. I mean, of course, it's heavily subsidized at this point.
Well, you need a marketing plan. In other words, somebody's got to be able to sit down, not just a
Right,
regulator,
especially
but
for gas stations that are operating at what, 1% profit margin or something.
Yeah,
It's pretty narrow,
yeah,
right?
it is. But I mean, you have to. You need to approach these people from a profit motive, not an emissions motive. And there's going to be considerable build outs and construction and time, just like when they change out underground storage tanks, unproductive time. So, why should this family-owned business go to that expense?
Good question.
So right now, just to, I don't have a complete answer for you, but right now, I think as was mentioned, on these hydrogen stations, they are being located, at existing retail stations, and the party putting them in is paying the station operator lease. So they're leasing a space, either a space on the island or a parking spot, or they're using it to any facts or figures. It follows the Propel model. Where Propel put in E85 stations at existing gasoline station, and that gasoline operator got revenue through Propel, not directly managing the gasoline sale, not demanding the sale like gasoline. So this is, it's an early phase, and right now the burden is taken off the station owner because another entity is willing to invest and pay a lease for the space.
And to add to what Gerhard was saying, I mean, to be honest, that's actually probably economically disadvantageous to the people who are operating the hydrogen fueling themselves, right? Their vision and their model is usually they want to essentially be, either somehow cooperating with gas station owners, or gas station owners are maybe wanting to purchase the equipment and they're helping to operate it, or something similar like that, to where they're not having to pay lease or pay rent money every month. To your question in terms of the physical capabilities, as Gerhard said and was mentioned, they are on existing gas station properties right now. There's always, as with any project, there's always all kinds of permitting issues, etc. But there are definitely models, and it's pretty fairly well known in terms of if you want a certain capacity of liquid or a certain capacity of gaseous, there are tools provided by national labs. The equipment designing companies and the station development companies, they have their own proprietary information, their own proprietary models. But the vision of this being able to be on a normal gas station property, I can't give you a hard number in terms of how many, how many places could you one for one get the same capacity, fuel the same number of vehicles, but the technical capability is there to be able to do this at a large number of station locations. One thing that actually is still in the works is that hydrogen, there are still permitting hurdles to doing the undergrounding, like you were saying, and some operational hurdles there. But the industry is working on those, and that's envisioned to help as much as we're getting much larger stations with going to liquid, getting the storage underground is going to enable much larger, another, kind of leap in terms of capacity.
Yeah, I guess, with all due respect to your comments, if I was a gas station service station owner with 10 pumps, you really, your commentary there just really didn't do a lot to excite me that, this is a business opportunity for me, and I've got a lot of running around to do, or surfing on the internet to find these various national labs and other entities.
No, I think what he's saying really is right now, if you have a gas station, you have the space, you might be able to entertain leasing out some of the space on your lot so that someone could come in and put in a fueling station for hydrogen vehicles, and then you collect the lease every month, and maybe it's not anything more than that headache, and they do all the permitting and everything else.
Yeah. And all I'm saying that
Right, yeah, that's right. That's correct. And to date, we haven't yet really seen any hydrogen pumps replace gasoline pumps. We've seen hydrogen pumps added to the existing gasoline pumps, and some of the new stations, in the past, they were kind of off on the corner of the lot. Now they're actually being integrated under the canopies. So in some way, it is just additional business potential for that station owner. They're getting the land, they're getting the land rent money. Potentially, they're getting additional foot traffic into their convenience store. Depends on how you model that or how you look at it. So there could be that. I will say, anecdotally, especially with some of the very early station developers, we do know they were personally very interested in being supportive of environmental goals. But it's absolutely, like you said, to get the widespread adoption, that's not going to be the case, right? So there are a number of hydrogen stakeholders who are continually evaluating the economic case. There's a H2USA, it's a collaborative through the Department of Energy. There is an station investment group in there, and they're always trying to get the right data. I will say it is difficult, right? We're in a stage where we haven't yet really seen a station built that is probably going to be the model for the type of economic model you're mentioning, right? So there is a little bit of forecasting involved. involved, a little bit of uncertainty. But it is recognized that there needs to be that business case made. I will say that in terms of just general station finances, evaluation through the AB8 legislation, there's a joint agency staff report every December and released by the Energy Commission. It's us in collaboration with the Energy Commission. And there are economic analyses on an individual station by station basis there for like a few different types of stations that have been seen in our network so far. So it could be interesting to take a look at that. I don't know if it necessarily would answer the question you're speaking or asking, but it could be maybe a starting point at least to kind of get some idea of what the finances are that we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I recognize that, you know, this is something that presents, you know, an opportunity for smaller businesses. But I also think, you know, believe that there needs to be a more user-friendly plan or something that shows me what those opportunities are and where how soon what I have to invest, how soon I'm going to get that investment back.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Any other updates from the Air Resources Board or questions or comments? Anyone on the phone? Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Brian and Patrick and Andrew for all that. Much more full and interesting conversation this month than normal months, so we appreciate it. The next item on the agenda, any public comments, Rita? Next item on the agenda is item 5. Philip Crabb has joined us. It's turning to springtime in Sacramento, the time when legislation blooms. What do you got for us?
That's a good way to describe it. Well, I will just kind of provide, as usual, the legislative committee report, and there was one held last Friday on March 8th. It was plenty to discuss. I'll start with our federal reports that were given. Of course, there's packets, legislative packets that include written reports from our federal and state consultants. But some verbal updates that were included at the meeting. SCAQMD had a successful advocacy trip to DC recently, and members of Congress and their staff, business representatives, and other stakeholders were supportive of a timely and transparent rulemaking process as it relates to the US EPA ultra-low NOx emission standard for heavy-duty trucks. It's something that the agency has been pushing for a couple of years now. Also, Mr. Andrew Wheeler was confirmed by the US Senate as the administrator for the US EPA. And also, reference was made to President Trump's budget overview that was recently released, and they'll be followed by more details, and SCAQMD has been working on annual appropriation requests to members of Congress as part of that budget process. On the state side, it was mentioned that speaking of blooming legislation, the bill introduction deadline recently passed, and the legislature introduced 2,621 bills, which is a new record. It is about 500 more than they did last year, so there's no shortage of good ideas, let's put that way. Also, just want to note that the California Assembly Natural Resources Committee will be having an informational hearing on March 18th regarding AB 617 program implementation. I think folks from around the state are invited to come share what's been going on the different communities. Also, in late February, the most recent cap and trade revenue auctions was held, and all 80 million allowances were sold at a price of $15.73 each, which is about 11 cents above the floor price. And that generated about $850 million for the state's greenhouse gas reduction fund account. And that could obviously potentially provide more funding for clean air in the South Coast region. The next auctions are going to be in May, August, and November of this year, and project to generate about $800 to $900 million each. So hopefully there'll be plenty of funding for folks to compete over. Also, there was an update provided on SCAQMD's sponsored legislation regarding the voting district authorization for clean air bill. There was basically, wanted to just say that now we do have an author for the bill. The bill number is SB 732, and the author is Senator Ben Allen. Now, spot bill language has been introduced, which basically means there's no substance to it. We met the introduction deadline with a standard kind of spot bill, but basically more substantive, refined, and streamlined version of the bill language has been submitted to Legislative Council. So we're hoping to get that hopefully next week, so that we can go ahead and alter the bill and go ahead and put in the more substantive language. And part of that process has just been reaching out to stakeholders, legislators, getting lots of feedback, and adjusting the language, modifying the bill, streamlining the bill to really focus on what's important in terms of establishing that voting district. And we're continuing to communicate with electeds and interested stakeholders basically to educate in terms of support for the bill. It was also stated, basically feedback was also received from various stakeholders regarding the tax cap issue relating to the bill. Now again, I just want to reiterate that this bill really would just be more logistical in terms of creating a voting district that future funding measures could be put on the ballot for. But this particular bill by itself, if you did nothing else and it got signed into law, it would not generate any funding. So it just creates the opportunity for a future. However, given that, in terms of any future funding measures that would come, the impact on the sales tax cap, we want to make it clear that the language would provide an exemption for the state cap, allowing for equal, basically, application of the tax throughout the region. Also, an important point is that it would not impact any existing tax cap space. So if there's cities, counties, transportation agencies that maybe they're in an area that there's a full cent or a half cent left in terms of available tax cap space, our bill would not impact that, or any future funding measures that would come from it would not impact that. So that has been an issue in terms of many folks that run their own sales tax measures wanting to protect their own possibilities for future funding measures. So that's the update on that. Another update was provided on potential congressional field hearings on the federal side. And basically there was a possibility that there's certain congressional members from the region that will be holding field hearings to address some of the environmental or air quality related topics. Obviously that'd be an excellent opportunity for us to engage, show what's been going on with the district, challenges that we're facing, and there is a strong possibility that we'll be able to have some of the field hearings within the district. We're still working on that process. It's going to depend what the congressional members, when they want to do it and where they want to do it. There was also 3 bills that were taken to committee for action. One was SB 210. It's regarding heavy-duty vehicle inspection and maintenance program by Senator Connie Leyva. This bill would authorize CARB to adopt and implement small check requirements for heavy-duty, non-gasoline trucks by modernizing emission controls and enforcement through a comprehensive inspection and maintenance program. Basically, it would enhance compliance and kind of ensure more even playing field for the trucks, the folks that are doing the right thing versus the ones that are trying to skirt the rules. Basically, the committee adopted a support position on that bill. Just wanted to note, though, that staff did want to speak with the author's office, suggesting a few adjustments to the bill. One will be clarifying that zero-emission trucks are exempt from any small check program that would be created. And also, the second one would be recommending that any penalty monies collected as part of the program be designated as funds meant to assist local air districts in mitigating heavy-duty truck emissions, with the penalty monies being distributed to air districts based on where the penalty originated. The second bill was AB 210 by Assemblymember Vogel, and this is also a small check related bill. This bill would exempt from the small check program all motor vehicles that are manufactured prior to the 1983 model year. That would be a change from the current law that exempts vehicles up through prior to 1976. It's kind of called the classic car exemption currently. So the committee, basically this is something that would definitely increase NOx emissions and VOC emissions within the South Coast. So the committee did adopt an opposed position on that bill. And the last bill is AB 285 by Assemblywoman Friedman regarding the California Transportation Plan. And this bill would require Caltrans to address in the California Transportation Plan how the state will achieve maximum feasible emission reductions of GHGs in order to attain statewide reduction of GHG emissions of 40% below 1990 levels by the end of 2030. So staff would like to work with the author to discuss that the bill also require how to addressing maximum feasible criteria for pollutant emission reductions to attain the state and federal ambient air quality standards by federal deadlines. Committee adopted a work with the author position on this bill. And I just wanted to note that there are recent amendments to that bill that we're analyzing that may impact how we move forward on it. And that's my report.
Okay. Questions? Bill?
Philip, on this authorization, when do you expect to have language in there? I think all I've seen now is may to shall, I guess, is the only change that when I looked on the, on what's on that spot bill now, but
right.
When do you expect, are you going to be, or is the author going to populate that with language in there?
Yeah, so the way it works, we prepared new draft language, submitted it to legislative council in the Capitol in Sacramento. The attorneys in the Capitol basically may rework it, whatever they think is the most appropriate way to reshape the language, not changing the meaning. So we're waiting for them to finish that process and are hoping to get language back by next week. Once we get that back, I would expect that it would be amended into the bill sometime soon thereafter.
Relatively short. Okay, so then then it would be up to the cities like Los Angeles or San Bernardino or like that to put this measure on their ballot, or the district can do that themselves, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the draft language would allow for a voter-driven initiative.
But it would be air quality management district-wide.
Right.
All
four
single vote.
Right.
Which can get tricky, of course, but yeah.
And the board, I think, also has an option to do it because any initiative can only do what the board has the power to do. But it would be a region-wide,
Right, either by voter initiative or by governing board vote, it could be put on the ballot.
Okay, and then if it's by voter initiative, it would be the same tax then. In other words, LA wouldn't have a half a cent and San Bernardino have 3/4 of a cent or something like that.
I mean, I would imagine so, but if it's by voter initiative, it's however the people write the proposition to get it on the
It would have to be consistent. If it's in one
It would
region,
have to be consistent.
It would have to be.
It'd have to be
Yeah.
consistent.
Yeah.
If the district wrote it, right?
The district or the,
Whoever
if
did
you
it.
can't have an uneven tax, you have to,
Okay.
they're all voting for it for one thing, they're all voting for one thing.
Yeah, you could have people in San Bernardino voting for a heavier tax than people in Los Angeles, who wouldn't quite be fair with it.
No.
All right, we've been tracking that because just to see, we have some comments and concerns about it. Thank you.
Art?
A couple of questions. On the money on cap and trade, is that gonna be hijacked again by this governor, or is the money all gonna go into one pot, or what's the situation?
Well,
Is it gonna go for
It does
the
go into the Greenhouse Gas Reductions Fund or the GTRF fund, and it is part of the budget process. It usually comes out of the budget trailer bill. Everyone's kind of fighting for the money in a sense, and the budget, the governor's budget proposal that they put out in January did not establish a payment, or basically an allocation plan. That's usually just an initial draft. In May, the governor will do a revise based on some of the new allocations and revenue that's going to be received by the state. Again, they're predicting how these other future options are going to go, but they don't know necessarily for sure. And of course, the Senate and the Assembly get involved in a negotiation for that funding. So it is part of multiple stakeholders and all the legislative leadership and the governor involved in the grant negotiations and allocation for the year.
So they're making chorizo or sausage?
The 60% continuous appropriation is still in place as of now.
Yeah, off the top kind of cut that goes to things like the bullet train and sustainable housing and things like that. That gets taken off the top, and then it's really, you're fighting over the remaining 40%.
So it's a train that's never appeared anywhere. easements.
Maybe in Central California sometimes they're better.
Yeah, it's a ghost street. It's a little ghost street we're all looking for. Now, on the field hearings, who's having field hearings?
So, this is for congressional members, and so I'm not sure actually the specific members myself, but when they went out on the DC trip, there were, I think some of the members are considering possibly having, field hearings, informational hearings on different topics, some overlapping with our issues on terms of air quality and things like that, so but it's still developing.
Obviously, you made a trip there, so you met with.
I didn't go on the trip myself, but, they met with numerous members of Congress, I know also with the EPA, folks like that, so I think it's still in the works.
Yeah, because I've got a lot of new members in the OC, so I'm just wondering if we're gonna have hearings down there.
It's possible, it's still being developed, so it's still tentative, we can provide a future update for you.
Okay. And then the other, is there any monies of it, the money that you guys are looking for AQMD, how would that be distributed? What's the intent? What would be the outlet? Where would the money go?
Well, the intent is to meet federal and state air quality standards.
Okay.
And the money would go to pay for the, provide incentives to replace equipment and vehicles necessary to do that.
Yeah, but when you're selling it.
You'd have to look at the 2016 air quality management plan to get an idea. I think it was 278,000 engines that need to be replaced.
On that order, yeah.
In order to get to attainment.
So if I'm Mrs. Sanchez or Mrs. Ching or Mrs. Chang and I'm going to the grocery store, and you're gonna charge me another half cent
No,
on
because
my tax?
you don't pay a sales tax on groceries.
Okay, so I pay on Home Depot.
Unfortunately.
Or whatever.
For other things, yeah,
What would be
Home
the
Depot,
incentive on my part to give money to fix the trucks?
Because every dollar invested in clean air pays back multiple dollars in public health benefits.
Okay.
And it prevents us from getting federal sanctions, prevents us from having basically all business shut down in the region, and the federal government writing a federal implementation plan that would differ quite dramatically from our state implementation plan.
So how would it help the neighborhoods and the areas?
Clean air.
Would it impact those?
They'd be in compliance with the clean air standards, so they would be breathing clean air.
Okay.
Cleaner air. I mean, depends
So
how
it
you
just
define
basically
clean.
go back to your general fund?
No.
It would be supplemental to the general fund?
It would be, there would be some administrative costs that the agency would have to obviously incur, but, I would imagine 95% of the money would be spent replacing those engines and other equipment and things necessary to get us to
So
attainment.
it'll come back to our communities?
Yes.
Come to our-
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm just, because if you're gonna sell it to me and you're gonna sell it to our water
Yep.
block.
Yeah, I would have to, I have to keep an open mind too, right? But it would have to be invested in all those things that we identified in the air quality management plan that have to get done to get us to clean air. So in that plan, we have laid out all the different things that need to be turned over and all the type of technologies that have to be in place in order to get to the federal air quality standards. And we need the city air quality standards too, and this would provide the resources to make that happen.
So the next question, the political question would be, have you guys done any polling?
Yes, it's in the package.
Okay. And then, and so then across the spectrum.
So we've done 2 public surveys, the most recent one was in January.
You go to the ballot probably in November then, right?
No,
Not this year.
2020.
2020, so you get the highest.
At the earliest. And I guess one of the most important things, at least to me, is that we would avoid the Section 185 fees.
Yes, you would. That's the idea, right?
Yes.
That's the idea,
Nobody
avoiding
wants to
Section
revisit
185
that
fees,
again.
where stationary sources have to pay, assume the penalty for all the mobile sources not cleaning up.
And so that means that the feds are gonna clean up the ports and the railroads?
No, that we would be cleaning it up, because we would have the money, the feds wouldn't have the
Well,
money.
I thought it
The
would be
feds might
equity
shut
issue.
it down.
Yes, if I'm the federal
I'm being
government, and I'm not speaking for Amy, who I think's on the line, but if I'm the federal government and I've been told, you have to now manage the South Coast Air Basin, And I'm looking at it and thinking, okay, well, there's 75,000 facilities, or there's 75,000 permits and 26,000 facilities. I could tighten down the permits on all of those, or I could look at the inventory and see, oh, look at that. All the emissions are coming from ships, from the port off-road equipment, from the trains, from the drayage trucks. Simple enough. We'll shut down the ports for 3 days a week and your entertainment. Right? That'll do it.
Well, sounds like a good shutdown solution from DC.
But do you think, I mean, how do you think that might impact our economy? And how do you think that might impact your ability to find food on your shelves and you know, lumber at Home Depot and everything else? I mean, it would be absolutely devastating. So we don't want to do that. We want to find a way to incentivize the turnover of existing equipment and engines necessary, and perhaps with the ships, capture technology
Well,
to
the
capture
question
the
is,
emissions necessary to get it to attainment.
if you're looking at a sales tax, wouldn't you look at a transportation tax, or be the ones that be there?
We've looked at everything.
Well, if you can pass a transportation tax, then let me know how you do it.
No, I'm just, it's a question, you know, you're getting one versus the other.
And you can convince Bridget to support a fuel tax, and we know how to do that too. I mean, we've looked at options. I mean, really, I mean, we have, you can go through the list. There's a whole list of options. Yes, exactly. Additional, I will correct, you're right. Correct for the record, additional. If you convince Bridget to support additional fuel taxes, then let me know. But, you know, there's a laundry list of things. And I mean, Bay Area AQMD gets a third of their budget from a property tax. We get zero, you know? Yeah, Janet lives there. She pays it, right?
That was a conscious decision. That was.
It was a
in
conscious decision.
1976.
Yeah, it was a conscious decision, but it's there, it's embedded in their budget. When they look at their budget every year, they think, oh, well, 33% is taken care of already by Janet and all her neighbors.
And if you look at the poll, over about 6 now, district-wide, over 60%.
Yeah,
The poll, up to 65% support. So there is support out there. There's a long way to go.
You know, you're right. I mean, there is a long way to go. It might not be the most viable way of doing it, but I mean, to me, so far, it's the best idea anyone's come up with. I don't like sales taxes. I don't think they're totally regressive. I think they're somewhat regressive. Denny Zane will tell you that most of them are paid by tourists. You don't pay on you know, medicine and food, which is good.
Well, it hit the vehicles, so, you know, that's one big,
But, you know, anyway, if there was a better way of raising the money, I'd be all for it.
Quick question.
Carlo, yes.
Thank you, Chair Lou. Just wanted to make sure I'm not misunderstanding or conflating. Is this the same ballot measure that Move LA has been talking about enthusiastically?
So, yes, I mean, this is the idea that if this authority were granted, that someone like Denny and Move LA might decide to try to qualify a ballot initiative. Of course, South Coast might decide to put something on the ballot too, because the governing board would have the authority to do that. It's not clear which pathway would be chosen.
And then is there, I mean, this may be getting too ahead of ourselves, but is there a possibility for 2 competing ballot measures?
I think there would be.
Yeah, all right.
Okay. 3 or 4.
Or 3 or 4, yes. Right. We'd have the Bill Lamar, the Denny Zane.
It's gonna be very, very expensive to put an initiative on the ballot in the 4-county region.
Yes.
I would doubt that there would be more than 2 unless somebody's going out and boards trying to counteract.
But what Denny's been putting together regarding this is not coordinated with us.
Yeah, it's separate. It's a separate process.
But any ballot measure that we put forward would be, we need to go to funding the air quality management plan in order to reduce emissions. There's basically a purpose for the money. It can't just be for random or, you know, it's got to be focused in a certain
Caribbean vacations and so
Well,
forth.
he has a purpose. Metrolink's a big part of his purpose.
It has to be within our authority.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's important to know too, as far as South Coast AQMD is involved, the agency can put something on the ballot and advocate to get something on the ballot. Once it's there, cannot lobby for it, cannot influence voters in any way, shape, or form on how they vote on it. That's just
not proper government. So there's a difference there between qualifying something, and if Denny gets something on the ballot, he'll lobby it like crazy. South Coast puts something on the ballot, they will just step aside and let the process work.
Great, thank you.
Okay. There are some other bills that are coming through the ringer too, that I'm sure you're gonna take a look at.
Absolutely, no, I mean, like I said, over 2,600 bills, we are obviously analyzing them, we'll have, our next ledge committee, I'm sure we'll have another big bunch of them, we're working obviously with CAPCOA, analyze.
Senator Skinner's up to an interesting diesel bill that I think is
Yeah.
dropped at this point.
Right.
And I'm sure there are others.
Yes.
Okay, so does that take care of legislative update? Any other questions or comments from anyone on the Home Rule Advisory Group? Member of the public? Okay, that gives us to update litigation and related EPA actions from our esteemed counsel. Bill?
Thank you, Dr. Wu. Well, state legislation is blossoming in the state. It's been relatively quiet under litigation front, and I don't really have any significant updates. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Just wait till we adopt our indirect source rules.
I'm really excited about that.
Is that it? Anyone have any questions on the litigation update or non-update, as the case may be? Anyone on the phone, member of the public? Okay, then we can go right to trends in transportation emissions, which is an interesting item that Zork has joined us for, and Rosheng has shown up in person, which is nice. I'm glad of that. So let's go on to item number 7.
Good morning, everyone. Mr. Chair, everyone. This will be a two-part presentation. I will provide the first part of the presentation on on-road vehicle emission trends, both in terms of the historical emission trends and also projected emission trends. And Rosheng will provide a presentation on regional transportation plan, transportation control measures, transportation conformity, and all the questions you've ever had about those topics. He's already here to answer. So in terms of the outline of my part of the presentation, I'll just provide a very brief overview of the more significant emission standards and regulations that are affecting on-road vehicles, what the emission trends look like, upcoming regulations, and also a picture of how the vehicle emissions compare to other source categories. In terms of light and medium duty vehicles, these are vehicles that are that have a weight of up to 14,000 gross vehicle weight rating. And for these set of vehicles, California low emission vehicle regulation has established emission standards that over time have become very stringent, starting from the 1994 model all the way to 2025 model year vehicles, and have progressively required manufacturers to certify to cleaner engine emission standards over time. I'll provide a slide that will show the impact of these regulations that have already been adopted. For heavy-duty vehicles, this graph essentially shows also how the standards for NOx and PM have become more stringent over time. NOx is shown on the left scale, PM is shown on the right scale. As you can see, from late 1980s, the NOx standard has been reduced from 6 grams per horsepower hour all the way to 0.2 gram per brake horsepower for the 2010 model year engines. For PM as well, you see the standards has reduced from 0.6 gram per brake horsepower hour all the way to 0.01, starting with the 2007 model year trucks. So there's been significant reductions for engine standards, again, for new vehicles and trucks. In addition to regulations for new, again, vehicles and engines, there's been also a number of in-use emission regulations and programs that also contributed to reducing emissions from these vehicles. The truck and bus regulation and race truck regulations have already required diesel trucks and buses to be equipped with either PM filters or comply with the 2007 engine model year engines. And eventually these both of these regulations would require that all diesel trucks and buses meet the 2010 engine standards by 2023, which is obviously a significant regulation, and we expect to see the benefit of it over the next few years. CARB has also adopted a number of fuel requirements. For CARB diesel, the requirement essentially was to reduce the sulfur level to 15 ppm in 2006. So that's the ultra low sulfur fuel that is currently used by all diesel vehicles. Also, California reformulated gasoline, started regulations starting from 1991, eliminating lead from gasoline in early 1990s, and progressively requiring more specific requirements, setting specifications for sulfur, aromatics, oxygen, benzene, and other components of gasoline. I&M program has been in place for a number of years for gasoline vehicles and diesel vehicles up to 14,000 pounds, and I'll mention that in one of my next slides, that CARB is also considering to come up with a more stringent I&M program for diesel trucks that are over 14,000 pounds. Incentive programs have been used over the years, ranging from CARB-MOIR, Prop 1B, MSRC. Again, incentive funding has been provided for early compliance with existing regulations or for situations where these programs have actually achieved more stringent requirements than existing regulations. In terms of public fleet rules, as you know already, we have a series of public fleet rules that are under our purview that establish requirements for purchasing new vehicles and trucks that are owned and operated by public agencies or by public fleets that are under specific contractual agreements with public agencies. So our rules require new purchases to be either alternative fuels or cleaner burning gasoline vehicles, depending on which category we're talking about. CARB has also adopted a public fleet rule affecting public agencies and utilities, it has already required these vehicles to be equipped with PM filters. I think as of 2012, all of these vehicles were required to install PM filters or comply with the 2007 engine model year. So in terms of how these regulations have affected our emissions, as you can see, this graph shows the emissions starting from 2000 all the way projected 2035. This is for light-duty vehicles up to 8,500 pounds. As you can see, for NOx, if you can take that example, the red line, in 2000, NOx emissions were about 390 tons per day. Today's level is about 58 tons per day in 2019. So we've achieved already about an 85% reduction because of all the existing regulations. And that trend is expected to continue all the way down to about 19 tons per day in 2023. That's, again, that affects like 95% NOx reductions from 2000 year levels. Population-wise, we're talking about a population of about 8 million in 2000, growing to about 10.5 million currently in 2019, and projected to increase to about 13.5 million in 2035. Somewhat of a similar trend for medium-duty vehicles. Again, these are vehicles that are between 8,500 pounds to 14,000 pounds. These are mainly smaller trucks, utility and service vehicles. There's been an overall emission reductions, again, from 2000 to current levels and projected to continue to 2035 because of the regulations. When we were generating these tables, we noticed a bump in the year 2005 for NOx. So we reached out to ARB, and they explained to us that this was basically a significant increase in VMT that appeared in 2000 to 2005 years, which was then reduced because of a recession. But the increase in VMT essentially overwhelmed the contribution of the benefits from existing regulations, at least for those few years. But then the benefits continue to show up in future years. Just in terms of the context, when you're talking about comparison to light-duty vehicles, In 2000, we had about 230,000 vehicles classified as medium duty. Currently, we have about 340,000 vehicles, projected to be about 460,000 vehicles. Again, the tonnage of emissions are relatively smaller compared to the light duty vehicles because of the population and overall VMTs.
Is that? Oh, okay, yeah, okay, I see. In the previous slide, it was 0 to 50 to 100 and above.
Right. This was up to 85. So the next slide is for heavy duty vehicles, and again, we have seen and we expect to see significant reduction in emissions from heavy duty vehicles, starting from year 2000. NOx emissions were about 290 tons per day. Current levels are about 100 tons per day, reduction of about 65% reduction to date in 2019, and projected to continue to decrease to about 64 tons per day, again, primarily because of the impact of truck and bus and drayage regulation. Population-wise, in 2000, we had about 150,000 vehicles. Today, we have about 230,000 heavy-duty vehicles, and expected to grow to about 300,000 vehicles by 2035. So if you look at the NOx levels, overall is about a 78% NOx reductions from 2000 emission levels. In terms of upcoming regulations that are affecting these various vehicle categories, the clean for light duty vehicles, the clean miles standards specifically would target transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft, and would look into increasing the zero emission passenger miles for these vehicles. This is an item that CARB is looking at, expected to take it to the board in 2021. The Advanced Clean Trucks program that is also CARB is looking at, it would require manufacturers to have a mandate to produce a certain percentage of their vehicles to be zero emission. I think current discussion is to consider up to 15% of their sales to be zero emission by 2030. This item is being considered by the board in 2020, next year. The low NOx program, this is a significant program that we are obviously tracking as well as other programs. This would establish a more stringent lower NOx emission standard than the current 0.2 gram standard. CARB has already adopted optional NOx emission standards as low as 0.02 grams. We still have to wait and see what CARB is going to adopt for this regulation. But this regulation will also establish more stringent in-use testing procedures and also more stringent warranty requirements. And they expect to take it to their board, I think, in first quarter of 2020. The heavy-duty I&M program that, as I mentioned, is also another program that is being considered by ARB to provide more stringent requirements for periodic inspections and also real-time emission measurements to validate the benefits that we're getting, obviously, from the existing regulations, along with additional training and education programs. Finally, there's a proposal to look at zero-emission drayage trucks that would eventually or require transition to zero-emission trucks, starting with perhaps with the 2026 model year truck. This item is expected to go to the CARB board in 2022. And again, these are all significant regulations that we're tracking that we're hoping to get significant reductions from these vehicles, from this program.
So you're projecting less emissions, but are you also projecting more trucks?
Right. So
more trucks.
NOx emission from trucks actually goes up a little bit. If we go back to that slide.
Yeah, but the overall trend
is there from 2022 to 2035 comes up just a little.
Population increases.
So the population increases.
Right. VMT
because there's turnover,
right,
and you get newer, cleaner trucks. Yeah.
There's growth, obviously, that is reflected in our forecast.
And the growth is attributable to what? More imports, exports, activity at the ports?
Right, yeah. Yeah, we get, I think when CARB develops the emission forecast, they look at forecast for VMTs that NPOs provide. They look at fuel sales
Do they account for like tariffs and recession and, I mean, the global economy, things like that?
Not in the last one.
They
They
adjust,
obviously don't.
yeah, they adjust it every few years, right?
That's why I'm saying what you need us to, talk about it.
So in terms of how this all sort of comes together, this pie chart shows the 2023 NOx emissions from all source categories. I apologize if it's some of the items in the bottom, but if you look at the right side, light duty vehicles in 2023 will account for about 11%, medium duty about 4%, heavy duty is about 14% of
This is
vehicles.
different from what was in the 2016 AQMD, right? That we had ocean-going vessels in 2023 being the largest source of NOx emissions, wasn't it?
I think we said ocean-going vessels combined with harbor craft represent the highest,
okay.
or the most, the top sort of
Alright.
the
I mean,
emitters.
that close, you see heavy duty's 14,
Right.
ocean going 14, that 16% is a bunch of things put together.
That's correct, yeah. 16% is all various types of off-road equipment, industrial equipment and so forth. But again, as you can see, the stationary source is about 18%. I don't know if you can see now, but aircraft 6%, train 6%, and other categories.
You have like an inventory, like how many vehicles, there's like 500 vehicles of this.
Yes,
You
we
have the
have.
actual numbers of those?
Yes, we do. Yeah, I kind of mentioned what the numbers are, but I can provide that.
If you can provide those, it'd be interesting.
Yeah, sure.
And then you have that broken down by age?
There's some categories, yes, for others, there's assumptions.
Yeah, so
But the
the Air Resources Board has a model that's used for that, right? The
For
MPAC?
the
Yes,
on-road,
MPAC.
MPAC is used for all the on-road equipment. For off-road, there's another model. And again, there's
Some estimation. It's on-
Regular cars, is that the red one? Is that the red line?
on the right, yeah.
Yeah, light duty.
So what, the 18% for stationary sources, is that an increase or a decrease by 2023?
It's actually increasing.
It is an increase.
It was 11% in 2012. What else has to be? The emissions aren't going up, but as a percentage of a smaller whole, it's going up.
Okay.
The transportation sources, when you say you have a number of all the vehicles of each type, are those all registered vehicles, or do they also include unregistered vehicles?
Good question. Well, I think it's both. So you have the registered vehicles that are registered in California, and then estimates the ones that come in from out of state.
What about
California
California unregistered?
I don't know. The carb's on the phone.
Yeah, which tend to be the older, more higher emitting vehicles.
I think MPAC 2017 has a category for out-of-state vehicles, so CARB does include those vehicles in.
Light duty as well as medium and heavy duty?
I mean, it's technically, you're not supposed to have, I mean, the ones that come in like temporarily, they're allowed to.
No, I know, but there are a lot of people who move here and don't re-register their vehicles because it costs money. It costs more money and they gotta get them swabbed. And there are other people who have vehicles, but they don't make enough money to register their vehicle, so they drive without a registered vehicle.
And temporary, I think it's like 10 days,
Steal my
it's very
sticker off
short, and a lot of people.
There are a
people
lot
keep them
of
longer than
people.
10 days.
Swap license plates.
Or
Or
have
swap.
none.
Or have none.
I live in East Oakland. So we have the license plate.
No one does.
I mean, we don't run those programs, so I think
Yeah.
that's a question for CARB, whether they've done studies or estimates.
So these numbers are from CARB.
Yeah, I mean, CARB models, or we work with them on.
For mobile sources, for stationary sources, we develop our own.
How many of those vehicles are public vehicles or owned by government?
Publicly, I had that number.
Small percentage.
I think we did a survey of public fleet vehicles last year for light duty and medium duty and heavy duty. We had about 60,000 vehicles.
What's the difference, what is the difference between light duty and?
Oh, the light duty or
The red
passenger
and the green.
vehicles, yeah.
So there's different cutoffs, the light duty is what, 8,500?
8,500 to 14,000 pounds.
And
No, light
Which
duty.
is-
Light duty is up to 8,500.
yeah.
What is that, like a little?
No,
Visually, how would I look at it?
Pickup trucks.
Pickup trucks, yeah.
Small
Vans,
Up to the,
panel
not
vans,
the
yeah.
big.
That would be the light duty, that'd be the
Yes.
medium duty?
No, that'd be.
Medium duty is the
duty is
medium trucks, like
Medium-sized
anywhere from a
trucks.
really large pickup to like,
So,
to a
smaller
panel
trucks.
van and panel.
Yeah.
And then the medium duty would be like a Ranger, like a little Ranger truck or like that?
No.
That would be in light duty.
That'd be light duty.
So-
Medium
About
duty
four-
are
about
like,
4 tons.
are like, commercial delivery vehicles, pretty large size,
FedEx
but
trucks.
not as big as a.
UPS trucks.
Right, a regular
Those would be the medium.
big truck,
Would
drayage
be the
truck,
medium duty trucks.
yes.
And then the other ones would be the.
Heavy
semis.
duty, that's the big, yeah,
Semis.
semi trucks that you see.
Essentially up to 4 tons, 4 to 7 tons, and then above 7 tons, something like that.
Roughly, yeah.
You've got 60,000 vehicles. Do you have it broken down by
Yeah,
county,
can you
state?
provide that survey to us? Because Art's been asking for something
think,
like that for maybe
Ann
2 or 3 years
provided-
now.
Yeah, we sent it.
Did we send it to you already?
Sent it.
Oh,
I'll
okay.
check, I gotta recheck my emails again.
But that's just public fleets, and that's 60,000, this is mostly light duty, is over 10 million.
10 million, yeah.
Take out light duty, it's, what, 600,000 or something?
Yeah.
Right.
So you got about, if they circulate on the lease, on the public, it'd be 20,000 vehicles a year then, right?
Yeah,
So at
yeah,
least,
you could, I mean, it's a market, it's definitely a market.
and so the total market on the light duty vehicles, is how many vehicles?
10.5 million,
10.5?
Right now it's 10.5 million, right? About in 2019.
So you basically, that's a small amount.
Yes,
So
very small.
It's a small amount, but if you put that on the secondary market, it would have an effect.
okay. We've interrupted you quite a bit, you're trying to get through this?
No, I'm done. I think I'm gonna hand it over to
Oh,
you.
okay.
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Liu and the fellow SRAC members. I'm very pleased to be here in person to provide some background information about SCAQ's Regional Transportation Plan, RTP, Transportation Conformity, and the Transportation Control Measures, or TCMs. Next. And because I want to focus on the transportation conformity and the TCMs, which you may be less familiar with, so I only include this one slide about the regional transportation plan. As you can see, the RTP Regional Transportation Plan is a federal mandate, and it is a long-term vision and investment framework for how the whole SCAQ region, which South Coast Air Basin is a big part of that, to address regional transportation and the land use challenges and opportunities. It is required to be updated every 4 years for the region to be eligible for federal transportation funding. The last adopted RTP is the 2016 RTP, and we're currently working on the next 2020 RTP. We call it Connect SoCal. Starting in 2012, SCAQ's RTP also includes state-required sustainable community strategies, or SCS, pursuant to SB 375. And the RTP SCS is required to meet the regional GHG greenhouse emission reduction targets set by CARB. As you may be aware, pursuant to California's Health and Safety Code, SCAQ's RTP SCS is the integrated transportation and the land use control measure portion of the South Coast Air Quality Management Plan, commonly known as the Appendix 4C of the AQMP. Next slide. So what's transportation conformity and why? And transportation conformity is required by the Federal Clean Air Act to ensure that the transportation activities be consistent to or conform with the objective of air quality planning, which is done by SCAQMD here. Specifically, transportation conformity requires that federal supported transportation activities will not create a new violation of the national ambient air quality standards, worsen existing violations, or delay timely attainment of the national air quality standards. As President Baiswarik earlier, the transportation, especially on-road transportation, which is SCAQ's portion, including trucks, cars, etc., are a major source of the air pollutant emissions in the South Coast region. Next slide. So what are required to meet transportation conformity? SCAQ, two of SCAQ's most important function is to develop the long-range RTP, which we also developed so-called Federal Transportation Improvement Program, which is a more short-term, 6 years, which implements the long-range, which is 20+ years RTP. In addition, all the federal supported transportation projects, either they need to receive federal approval or federal funding, they are also required to meet the transportation conformity requirements. Next slide. Transportation conformity connects the Air Quality Management Plan or State Implementation Plan done here by SCAQMD and with SCAQ's RTPSS through so-called motor vehicle emission budgets. It is a two-step process. So on one hand, consistent with also as part of the attainment demonstration in the AQMP SIP, motor vehicle emission budgets are established in the AQMP SIP to set caps on how much emissions that RTP or FTP are allowed to produce. On the other hand, as part of the regional transportation conformity determination we need to do for our RTP and FTP, we perform regional emission analysis to demonstrate that the RTP and the FTP meet all the applicable emission budgets. Next slide. Conformity is very important because a conformity failure could have very serious consequences. A conformity failure can be in 3 different forms. One so-called conformity grace period. The second one is transportation conformity freeze. And the third one is transportation conformity lapse. And the conformity lapse grace period and a conformity freeze, they have similar, same actually consequences, just triggered by different factors. So, for example, the grace period usually trigger if we don't, meet certain conformity guidelines, and a conformity freeze usually triggered by some SIP disapproval by EPA without a so-called protective funding. Under conformity freeze or conformity grace period, there will be no new RTP, FTP, or the amendments, which is a change to the project in those plan or programs. In addition, but all the projects in the currently conforming plan and FTP still can move forward. Under the more serious conformity lapse, the consequences more severe. Not only no new RTP, FTP, or the amendments allowed, but also the use of the federal transportation funds is much more restricted, and only exempted projects and the previously authorized TCM projects in the current plan can proceed. One thing to keep in mind is that under conformity failure, the amount of federal transportation funding will not be reduced during the conformity failure. Only the use of the funding may be severely restricted. Now let me turn to the transportation control measures, or TCMs. And TCMs are certain type of measures that are specifically identified and also committed in the applicable SIP or AQMP that those measures are really for the purpose of reducing emissions of air pollutants from transportation sources by either reducing vehicle use or changing traffic flow or congestion conditions. And the Clean Air Act very kind of specific set to make that any vehicle technology based or fuel based or maintenance based measures which control the emission from the vehicles and kind of fix the traffic condition, they're not TCMs. So that's why you won't see those in SCAQ's RTP or FTIPs. Currently, there are 3 categories of TCM in the South Coast region. The first is transit, intermodal transfer, and active transportation measures. The second category is the HOV and the express lanes. And the last category is the information-based transportation strategies, or IPS, and, such as the traffic control center, traffic signal synchronization, and the telecommuting programs. So how robust and effective are these TCMs? As I mentioned earlier, we're currently developing the next RTPSS, Connect SoCal, so we won't be able to measure it, but I do want to, for illustration purposes, to probably bring the evaluation based on last adopted RTPSS. As I mentioned earlier, SCAQ's RTPSS is part of the 2016 AQMP, listed the Appendix 4C. And in that report, we performed a required TCM best available, actually both the reasonable available control measure, RACM, and the best available control measure, or BACM analysis. And we did that analysis following EPA's guideline. So we look into all the TCMs are being implemented in the SCAQ region, in the South Coast Air Basin. We also review all the TCMs implemented in other, throughout the country, SIPs. We review over like 33 SIPs throughout the country. In addition, we also look at the TCM that were proposed but not implemented in the South Coast Basin. And the analysis demonstrates that the TCM projects implemented in the South Coast Air Basin constitute TCM backend. So in other words, they're very robust. They were best in this country. In terms of effectiveness, we also did a kind of rough estimate on the benefits from TCMs in the 2016 RTPSS. The reason we call it rough is because TCMs project programs only a portion of the comprehensive transportation system that are interconnected. So it's really hard to separate accurately the impact because they are really interconnected. And based on that analysis, we show that only about 1.2 tons or less of emission reductions will be achieved by this TCM in the 2016 RTPS in terms of either views of the ROG, NOx, or PM2.5 reductions. And also very important to note that compared to the past AQMP SIPs, and the potential future TCM's impact will be diminishing for 2 reasons. One is, as Zach presented earlier, the emission standards are getting more stringent. So the same amount of VMT reduction, that's what really SCAQ's RTPSS try to do. Each VMT reduction will get less oil emission reduction since the engine are getting cleaner. On the other hand, most of the TCM projects actually in the South Coast Air Basin have been adopted in the previous SIP and have been implemented. So the emission benefits from those project programs measures, they are now included in the baseline and won't show up in these TCM benefits. And my last slide, so what to expect about TCMs in our next RTPSS or Connect SoCal. Right now, as I mentioned earlier, we're in the process of developing the plan, and the scheduled adoption is next April. So we won't know exactly what kind of TCMs will be included. But there are two things that are really driven the next RTPSS. And the first one, as you may be aware, the last South Coast AQMD, 2016 AQMD, actually includes several state implementation plan, or SIPs. And each of those SIPs include much more stringent motor vehicle emission budgets. And these emission budgets are currently under EPA's review, but we do anticipate that they will be approved and will apply to our next RTPSS. And secondly, as I mentioned earlier, SCAQ's RTPS also need to meet the greenhouse gas emission reduction targets set by CARB. And very recently, CARB has set a much higher GHG emission reduction target for SCAQ region. In 2035, they increased from 13% previously for 2035 now to 19%. So that's a very substantial increase. Because our plan need to meet both, so I think it's very reasonable to anticipate all the TCMs that we are going to come up with will be more likely to be more stringent to what already are very robust TCMs. So that conclude my brief presentation, and I'll be happy to take your questions. Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
Are the conformity budgets predetermined by the Clean Air Act or by the planning and activities?
The latter, because as I mentioned earlier, it's set through the attainment demonstration. Because in each SIP, what require district, carbon, and SCAQ as a part of that to demonstrate that by the attainment deadline, all the measures were implemented can meet that. And the SCAQ's on-road transportation is part of that part, right? So in order to make the attainment portion that SCAQ's RTPS is allowed to emit will be set as the emission budget.
Okay, so you know what the guideline is, and then you adjust the activity, the allowable activity.
Yeah, the inventory. And the new measures, and then you try to set. That's why I mentioned the budget is getting so much smaller. Right now, actually, we're very worried because we did some, compared to the new budgets, many of the years we have no margin. So, that if we're doing any, because there's so many parts, like growth forecast, as Zorka mentioned earlier, the growth. And in the SCAQ region, again, South Coast is really the biggest part of the SCAQ region, where it projecting about 3.6 million additional population by 2045. So that's, they mentioned like a whole state population. So when you have this kind of change, when you have no margin, it really makes it very difficult. And if we cannot meet that budgets, then we trigger transportation conformity failure, which has really serious consequences because very important transportation project may be delayed at the least, and may not be moved forward on the timeline.
Janet, and then Mark.
Okay. Quick question. Is congestion considered a positive or a negative in terms of emission reductions?
Emission certainly is negative. Okay. So it's kind of both, because itself certainly is negative because people sitting in a car and the emission, and there's a curve, right? So low speed emission high. So that's no question about, you certainly produce much high emission. On the other hand, congestion deter people from driving. If it's a free flow, everybody drives. So there's so-called induced demand. So congestion does have I don't know whether you like it or not, but it does prevent people to drive even more. But by and large, I think it should be.
So the modeling treats it in both directions.
Yeah, we
if
have
you can
to.
substantiate a mode shift,
Yes.
then you get the reduction. And if it's just congestion, then you have increased emissions. And the model does both.
Maybe on the induced side, we're improving because the emission modeling, there are two really elements. At SCAQ, we do so-called travel demand model. So we should really take into all the trips speed, very specific. And then on the emission side, we use the same CARB's infrared model.
Remember, their primary objective is to reduce congestion.
That's SCAQ's primary mission.
Even despite the new state guidelines about switching level of service over to VMT, SCAQ still has a congestion reduction objective.
Yeah, that's,
okay.
Because that's really, we need to, our really primary, because our major products, regional transportation plan. So our focus is really on transportation side. So, yes.
Thank you.
So I see a photo in here under water transportation control measures, and it mentioned telecommuting, and I'm wondering whether telecommuting is going to be a bigger component now that you're saying we're going to get another state moving into Southern California by 2045, and it doesn't look like we're going to be adding roads. Is telecommuting going to be a key component to reduce congestion and air pollution?
Yes, it's already a very important component in the IPP. So this short answer to the yes, and we try to encourage. And actually, it's very encouraging because if you look at the technology advancement, now video conferencing is very convenient. Even at SCAQ, now our laptop we're allowed to telework at home. Like one day week things. So it becomes more popular.
I just have one comment. I just got finished, did my taxes last week, and I reduced my mileage by almost 2,000 miles, due in large part to the webcast that you guys do and that CARB does.
We're taking SIP credit for those two.
Zero emission vehicles, so.
I kept both my gas guzzlers in the garage, but yeah, I mean, it's great.
Bumper to bumper zero emission vehicles is actually another thing where we don't have to worry about congestion.
If we could be more interactive on that, where you can not only webcast, but ask questions and everything,
Well, we have the Bill Lamar mode.
That's on silent, all right?
We have Brown Act limitations. You have to allow anyone into your house to ask a question.
Yeah, then you'd have to publish notice, so you'd have to put the notice up on your door 2 days in advance.
You could put your lobbyists to good use and have them amend the Brown Act in the interest of cleaner air and reduced emissions.
Can I ask, I know that there's the carpool and van pool incentives for companies, but does the SCAQMD have a telecommuting?
Good, we just implemented it, actually we just started getting applications this last month. So
there was a pilot.
There's a pilot for a little over a year, and now we're implementing.
So you guys should do that for this
district-wide.
Again, we have Brown Act issues at this group, unfortunately. But yeah, some people do. I mean, not Bill and Janet normally don't come down. I hope you offset your greenhouse gas impact on your trip down today. But they participate from San Francisco. We have EPA participating from San Francisco. We have many times Riverside Transit stays in Riverside.
Did you come down with the Boeing 757?
Yeah, how you're getting back is actually a bigger question at this point. So the thing that's always kind of puzzled me about this whole relationship between the regional transportation plan and whatever's happening under or not happening under SB 375 and transportation control measures and the transportation conformity budget stuff is when we have 80% of our emissions roughly, maybe a little bit less, coming from mobile sources, and then this transportation plan, how there should be a way to have transportation control measures that deal with the fact that 80% of those emissions are coming from mobile sources. And I know they're different things, but given our situation, we do provide you the budget, but we can't just arbitrarily eliminate, say, 45% of that NOx budget just to get to attainment, because then you wouldn't be able to even come close, right? I mean, so how do we make this work more effectively as a program, other than just ratcheting down and forcing you to adopt more transportation control measures? I mean, is there a better way of doing this than we have?
Before I answer that question, if you look what are in the RTPSS, there are really two broad categories. You have transportation projects programs that we receive from the County Transportation Commission or CTCs through their process. And then there are other is more land use side, really because of the SCS. But as you know, SCAQ really does have, just like SCAQMD, we do not have authority over land use. So all those is really more policy encourage local to do. So if you look at both of those, it's really difficult. If you look where the emission can be reduced, really effective one is really technology. And as I mentioned earlier, it's very specific. All the technology-based, fuel-based, even maintenance-based measure, they cannot be TCM. So if any TCM include, the impact by nature are rather kind of limited. Even getting more so because the vehicle getting cleaner. So let's say by the time our vehicle zero emission, we got no benefits, right? Even though we reduce VMT a lot. So given that, inherently difficult, another thing I want to mention is that 80% mobile sources also quite a bit of that is running ocean-going vessel, locomotive, airplane. Those are really kind of not within SCAQ's purview. Same thing, So the really thing, very portion, the portion that we can impact really on the trucks and automobile side. And as I mentioned, we're doing a lot. Actually, this region doing a lot. So I mentioned earlier, we demonstrated back for good reasons, best available control measure. If you look in the past, the federal transportation funding is the biggest part of the transportation investment. Right now, within SCAQ region, South Korea in particular, local are proposing a lot of local measures. So if you look at the last RDP, 2/3 of all the funding are from local, which is pretty unprecedented. I mean, it's the strongest throughout the whole country, although we do have the worst air quality. But that aside, in addition, a lot of the local measure money really for the capital expenditure of TCM projects, like transit. Right? And as you may be aware, even though we have spent a lot of money actually over the consistent on the transit ridership is going down. So it's really, we try as much as we can, but there are a lot of factors really kind of hinder that.
I just add to that. So I think Gongkin covered most of it. I mean, you saw those huge reductions in the different categories of mobile source emissions. That wasn't due to VMT reduction, right? It was due to technology. So, if SCAQ got a 3 or 4% VMT reduction, they would be jumping for joy. But for us, it's very small compared to a 90% cleaner truck or a zero emission vehicle. So the road to attainment isn't through VMT reduction. But where we can engage SCAQ and do engage SCAQ is when they're doing their regional transportation planning, is how can you build, say, incentives into the transportation network? Can you have zero emission truck lanes? Can you, maybe some of the congestion pricing can incentivize cleaner vehicles, and that will actually get us more, we think, than trying to squeeze that tiny bit out of VMT reduction.
You had your card up, but you never put it down, Mark. So
I have another question.
But I have to go to Bill because he had his card up before you, and then I don't know when Art came up.
So, Governor, before, can I add to what you mentioned? Actually, all those are within a part of SCAQ's RTP, but all those take a long time. So I just want to add clarification on that. Thank you.
Rong Shui made a good comment there when he was talking about, getting to cleaner air through technology forces. But you also, that it was going to be technology based, but you also mentioned maintenance based, I think, didn't you?
Yeah, more than I am.
Yeah. And, you know, as emission thresholds continue to decline, get lower, it's becoming more and more costly for stationary sources to, you know, meet those standards, either in new technology or reformulation, and some of them are just unachievable now. I mean, we use that black box, how I get the green box, but nevertheless, it isn't like it was 10, 20, 30 years ago, where it's a change of business practices. But I think there's some advantage in looking at preventive maintenance and best business practices, just like anything from good housekeeping. When I was managing Edison's Clean Technologies program, there were many of the seminars that I gave where we passed out push brooms to the audience. These were shop owners, just to keep the dust down, to clean up their shops. But I mean, as far as preventive maintenance on engines and motors and things like that, and what benefit there are in the terms of lower emissions just from doing that, changing filters out and so on, and having that as maybe an inspection criteria in there. You know, that isn't necessarily going to be free, but it's a heck of a lot cheaper than $100,000 or $500,000 for a replacement unit. So that may be something to look at.
Okay, who is next, Art or Mark?
Mark.
Okay. I recognize that reducing the VMT achieves congestion relief as well as air pollution relief, but changing technologies doesn't achieve both. But non-vehicular transport like Hyperloop, and if this is a 20-year plan, is that being considered, any of those proposals being considered in this plan? And is SCAG in discussions with those groups to figure out where they are and whether they're feasible?
It's definitely not in the last plan, but we certainly are aware of that. Actually, this next cycle of RTP, or we call Connect SoCal, we do have a kind of a new focus on the new emerging technology. Hyperloop is certainly one of them. Because that's not my program area, so I do not know the specific, but as an overall category, new technology certainly is we recognize that, and I believe it will become more relevant. And another is autonomous vehicles too. So those are certainly have potential, although you know, again, this is probably be further down the road.
Yeah, it just kind of struck me. It's going to kind of flip back to the other question of taxes and the inequities that you're placing on working families and working neighborhoods and communities, because we also have to sustain ourselves economically. And one of the things that I've seen in other states, in Arizona, when they wanted to build a stadium, they put a $1 tax on everybody flying in and flying out of the airport. Build a thing. So what I'm looking at is, I'm looking at the inequities on the bar chart here, and this group here is subsidizing the other half for their lifestyles and their inabilities. So I would, you know, if you're looking at putting out something on the ballot, the first question I would raise for my community would be in the inequities that, why am I sustaining the hotel and hospitality industries when they're not really paying, you know, sustainable salaries to those people? And why shouldn't we tax for the quality of life or the burden that they're putting on our quality of life by flying in and using our resources, whether it be the airplane industry that's flying people in and out. And I think that's something, we may not be able to regulate them, but we surely can tax them at the port of entry on fees. And I don't bet you nobody ever looked at that, and nobody's ever
That's
looked.
on our list.
Is it on the list?
The
Okay.
Coalition for Clean Air ran for, I think, 3 or 4 years a bill to add container fees to every container.
No, not
coming
container.
through the ports. Well,
Not
that's the same idea though, is that in order to put the cost burden on those who are, causing the problem, if the ports are our largest source of air pollution emissions, which they are, then why not have a container fee? And it was vetoed. And there's no way you could get it through the legislature again.
Well, the other is that we're looking at it, especially in my communities, that I have huge populations of the people that we service in the schools. Both parents work, they work in the service hospitality industry, and if you look at the makeup of the Latino community and the minority community, it's just in the hospitality industry, it's the biggest component. So if you have like a tax, a bed tax, or something on that, versus one on the guy that's making $14, $12 an hour, versus the other guy that's paying $400 or $500 a night, a $2 or $5 fee on that room, he's gonna pull that out of that refrigerator and spend it on a little 2-inch vodka bottle for $8 or $10. What I'm looking at is, why don't we look at those type of fees at the ports when people get on the passengers and some of those, and then maybe we look at the container fee issue again, but also look at the issue of how do we get those when they come at the port of at the airport in and out, and those fees, because you'd be paying by the passengers would be paying for that fee, and I think it's an equitable fee to ask every individual, all of us, because we all use the airports. We're also placing a burden on those communities, and if you look at those communities, they don't place them. Those airports aren't in high-end communities, and those are the communities that are looking for social justice. And wouldn't it be the need, and it wouldn't it be correct, and to ask for those communities to, if you're placing a burden on them, on the economic, on their feeding their children and putting something on the table, wouldn't it be also be a burden on placing on those that are using the services in their communities?
Well, I think that staff is considering every possible source.
Well, I would like to see if you guys would consider it and place it on the board. I'd like to see an up or down vote on that, or at least get it up for discussion.
You can't impose those unilaterally.
No, but you can get it up for a discussion, Lou. I mean, it's
No, they're considering every revenue source possible.
It was on the list on the funding plan, airport.
Okay.
Airport fees.
Okay, so what was the results of the discussion? A lot of joyfulness, right?
Well, nobody likes taxes or fees, but it was brought up. I think we were looking at where, you can actually raise revenue, like how much would it have to be to raise enough revenue or a significant portion of the revenue. But I wasn't in all those discussions, so I don't want to.
Could you provide us that information?
Send you the funding plan.
No, but obviously if you looked at the revenue, maybe, you place a $1 fee, it may be insignificant, but I think, the person that's buying $100 worth of groceries, if you add another $1 or $2, that's gonna make a more impact on them versus the guy.
I think there was another issue too, potentially with, since lanes are going across state lines, it's not necessarily like a local issue, it could be like a federal issue, so I think there is authority issues on what kind of fees you can work on.
Listen to my argument.
At an airport.
Yeah.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we send you the funding plan that was adopted when the AQMP was adopted, and then that might help explain some of these issues.
Because it's a fee and you go to the port, it's not a fee on the other. Okay.
Do we have any other questions or comments for either presenter? Anyone on the phone? We lost our member of the public. Okay, then subcommittee status reports. Dan, do you have anything on freight sustainability?
I don't have anything after this great discussion today. I will note that there is the Advanced Clean Transportation Expo coming up at the end of April, so. And
Early this year, but it's the place to be if you're interested in alternative freight technologies.
Was that?
Bill Murray, small business consideration updates.
I don't really have any report. We've been following the AB 617 activities and everything, but I would like to make one recommendation, and that is to include in the topics of discussion, CARB CTR regulation. It wasn't listed in there when we had our last meeting, discussions of 2019 meeting topics.
Oh, I mean, you want a deeper dive into that issue than we
No,
got?
not a deeper dive, but a continual periodic monitoring of it or updates.
We're planning on it. We're just waiting for CARB to come out with that language, which should be out April-ish.
Right.
And then once
Okay.
it's
So
out.
by the next time we meet, maybe we can
Possibly.
and we can include it under the CARB item, right? Yeah, we can do that. Just remember to try to do that. Kurt, EJ 617 implementation.
Yeah, well, the Wilmington, West Long Beach, Carson Steering Committee is meeting tomorrow evening at.
Pretty much nonstop meetings.
Yes, from 6 to 8:15. San Bernardino, Muscoy, Steering Committee will meet March 21st, and the East Valley, Boyle Heights, West Commerce, will meet March 28th. The schedules are all laid out on the website under AB 617 implementation, so you can go to each group and see when they're.
And there was enough update to the last governing board meeting, so there's materials on the internet on that board package.
Are we allowed to ask questions about that?
Sure.
Okay. I guess I have two questions and then a comment. So my first question would be, the steering committee meetings, they're public meetings. So the materials for those, should they be sent out to anybody who signed up under that?
I believe we're sending them out when they're ready, which is
Okay.
difficult when you have a meeting every week, to everyone on the steering committee and anyone who's signed up.
Interested parties, because I know I've gotten the notices, but I've never actually gotten any of the materials.
And to double check that.
I have the same issue. I've
Yeah.
signed up on the list multiple times and I never get anything.
Right, I think the steering committee gets the materials, but I don't know if the interested parties actually get any of the materials.
So they're obviously sending yours to Bill.
So we're posting on the website, all the materials that we're sending it out to the committee, is all posted on the website. So if
Okay,
you're interested in seeing,
It'd be helpful maybe to send out a notice, because usually with a lot of the working groups, there's a notice that says, hey, the materials and presentation are now posted on the website with a link. So that'd be helpful for the parties, included members of the public as well that are also interested parties, I'm sure. Then my other question, I know that emission reduction plans are going to be the big topic for tomorrow. And I know in the blueprint, there's supposed to be detailed affirmative source apportionment. Is that going to be presented to the steering committee? Because I know there's going to be certain types of feedback we're looking for with types of sources and at the tag. And some of the risk drivers, those necessarily don't match some of the sources that are going to be covered.
The plan is to start talking about specific actions that can go into community emission reduction plans. We don't have a lot of time in these meetings to go deep into source apportionment methodology. A lot of that's going to be done at the technical working group. The final plans will have a discussion of what we know about risk apportionment and source apportionment, but there's not enough time in these steering committee meetings to dive into that. We did present in the earlier meetings what our MAPES data shows and what our thoughts were on where the risk in these communities will come from, and that will be reflected in the plans.
Okay, because I guess my concern is DPM is one of the large risk drivers and it doesn't match with some of the sources that seem to be a large highlight of.
Well, I mean, when you go to the meeting tomorrow, we're going to talk about everything, the highest priority sources are identified by the community. A lot of them, most of them are
I understand that.
diesel sources.
Okay.
Bill?
I noticed that the, what you were talking about, the priorities, or highest priority sources, especially for East LA, Boyle Heights, that particular community was very informative to me. I mean, it listed a plating shop or a landfill or an auto body shop, something like that. But I didn't see the same format for Wilmington or for San Bernardino on the interactive map. And what I'm using it for is to just distribute to my members. You know, if you if your industry or one of your shops is on that list, pay attention to that. And
Well, it's,
why aren't they the same, I guess?
well, first of all, the different steering committee meetings can be different. They're driven by the communities and the residents and the people on the steering committee. So there are differences. We're using facilitators for some, we're using co-hosts for others, and it is an organic process. But we did use the same format for the last round of meetings in terms of identifying the priority sources. In some communities, they may identify specific addresses and specific facilities. Other communities may not. We're not going to put that information, we're not on our own going to say this is a community concern at this corner if the community didn't bring it up.
No, I'm saying, but I'm not talking so much about what you list, I'm talking about the format.
Format was similar, wasn't it, in the last round of meetings?
Yeah, the format is the same, just people have different concerns and obviously the prioritization activity.
Well,
It was the same, but it had different concerns.
When I looked at the interactive map, and then below that, the format of the facilities listed, I think you had like 99 of them. That's unique to East LA, Boyle Heights. That is not the same. I couldn't find anyone for San Bernardino, Muscoy, and the one for Wilmington and West Long Beach is completely different. I'm not talking about.
So I think also each community, so for example, in East LA, will give us a lot more specifics on specific businesses per se. But then in other communities, they said, well, it's a rail yard or trucks or other refineries. So you give specific, I guess, they give locations, but they didn't give specific names. So that's why the list differs.
So some of those maps are just mapping out the concerns brought up by the community, not necessarily our understanding of all the
Right.
sources.
It's just what they said, what they pointed out to.
Bridget.
Okay. I had my two questions, but I forgot my comment. So my comments just was a general observation I had. I went to the TAG meeting, which I thought a lot of the presentations by technical staff was very good. But there was one public comment that I believe it was a young woman from the Inland Empire, and her comment basically was she was hoping that the agency would drive their data to match advocacy. And one of your staff members actually agreed with her, which I found problematic and disturbing. Doing somebody who does technical analysis, I would never ever imagine that the agency's data should ever meet anybody's advocacy. It should always be data and be objective. And I know that I followed up with Jason afterwards recently, and he completely agreed and disagreed with that statement, so.
I've already looked into that.
Okay.
It's a misinterpretation of,
All right.
Miscommunication.
of what was said.
I
by-
figured, I just wanted to bring that to your attention again, because it was upsetting to hear.
Kurt, did you actually finish this item? Yep. Before the question started? Any comments? Okay. Dave is not here to talk about climate change activities. Anyone have anything under that? No? Okay. Any other questions, comments generally on subcommittee status reports? Hearing none. Report from and to Stationary Source Committee, Dr. Fine.
Very fast, because I'm supposed to be undone in 1 minute. But last Stationary Source Committee, we heard about the reclaim audit report, and then our updates on how we're going with the reclaim transition. Rule 1134, which is a BARC rule for gas turbines, and which is going to be at the April board meeting for hearing, and then an update on 1111, which is the residential furnaces. Agenda for this Friday, the two main items are Rule 1106 as well, which is marine and pleasure craft coatings, and then we're also doing an update on 617 at stationary.
Great. Questions or comments on that? Okay. Any other business? Item 10. Hearing none. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Art.
Yeah, is there any way that you guys could print like a calendar of like when you have conferences and workshops and stuff for the year?
It's, I mean, it's an ongoing process that changes, but there is a calendar on the website. That's really the only place.
Monthly.
Monthly, yeah.
Well, it actually has a spot.
Is there an
top
annual?
left where you can, well, all, it says all, so as far out as they projected,
You
it's
just
on.
said something about, I just kind of caught it, something occurring at the convention center.
Yeah, that's not an AQMD thing, it's an event that the AQMD sponsors, it's the Advanced ACT Expo, Advanced Control Technology Exposition, it's at the Long Beach Convention Center at the
When is that?
end of April.
April 24th, 23rd through the 26th,
Something like that, yeah.
And that's in Long Beach?
Yeah, if you just Google ACT Expo, it'll come up. Okay, any other comments? I'm assuming there's no public comments, since we have no members of the public. Our next meeting, that brings us to adjournment. Our next meeting, according to this, is scheduled for May 8th, 2019, right here in CC8. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for showing up. Great turnout. We'll try to get, are you going to be the new Bill Quinn?
It's a little bit undecided. We're still trying to round out the rest of the stuff.
Right, yeah.
So, yeah,
Okay.
we're almost there.
All right, folks on the phone, we're done. Thank you very much. We're going to hang up now.